I can remember the first time I met Mike when Betty Jo brought him to the house various times. The girls brought their guests home just constantly, but Mike had a deep, resonant voice. I knew the minute I heard him speak that he could sing, because he had a voice with quality to it, and he was nice looking and a gentle manner that was, to me, was most attractive. So from that time on, he came often. He'd walk Betty Jo home from school and things like that. And it happened that summer we were doing some remodeling around the house and other things. We created a yard. We had acquired a front yard. We had acquired the property next to us and had built into the house, which extended our house, gave us a big north wing. I'm sure I've spoken about this before, but then in landscaping and planning the front yard, I believe the city was putting in cement sidewalks too, which we hadn't had up to this time. So we put in a small, low retainer, a cement wall around the corner lot, and started the landscaping. Well, when the day that the cement was poured, the children could not resist. They went out to the corner and pressed their hands in the cement. Well, it happened that Mike DeMura was there, and he put his handprint right in with my children. Now, this was in our very early acquaintance, and it was just a kind of prophetic thing to do, because eventually he did become a member of the family, and today and forever, I guess, those handprints will be there. People walking along the sidewalk all through the years would stop and talk about all these little handprints in there, because they are various sizes, and of course Mike's was a man-sized hand at that time, being college age, and everybody thinks it's the father. It isn't. He just joined my family, my children group that very day, and later he really joined legally. Well, the romance flourished that summer, and by the fall semester, Betty Jo went back to the university. And Mike DeMura also transferred to the university at Tucson, and by this time, this is Betty Jo's junior year, and by this time Mary is also going to Tucson. So I have 3 daughters in the university, and incidentally 2 in high school. Can you imagine parents carrying a financial load like this? 3 daughters living in sororities on the university campus, and 2 in high school at the same time. Well, the girls themselves should write the entire story of their university years, because they were the most fun. I'm sure that they were some of the happiest years that they've ever experienced, because everything was vital and exciting, and they were in the midst of everything from one year's end to the next. Well, Emma Jean, being the first one to go down there, had switched her majors. She started as a home ec major, and then she switched over into science, and took an extra year at the university. And with Betty being a year behind her, it made them really graduate at the same time. And Emma Jean was dating Johnny Nelson from Winslow, And as it worked out, Johnny and Mike and Imogene and Betty all graduated together. And if you, I'm sure that the record, the story that they'll tell, will be just a real jubilee year, because that was really something. Because these two couples married each other. You see, these were real romances, and they turned into weddings. I'll have to tell you one collegiate dirty trick they played on me, because I've laughed about this all my life, because it was typically a college trick. Tucson didn't seem so far away, and with 3 daughters in school, I did get to go down once in a while for occasions, and if I ever went to Mesa, I made it a point to go down to Tucson. And I had a friend, Mabel Richardson, who had a son and a daughter at their university, and we used to manage using each other's car to get down there occasionally for contact. And I loved it too, because school to me was always an exciting place, and I loved every visit. And so when there was an occasion, why, we'd get down there. Well, I was in Mesa at one time, and Johnny Nelson had a car, and they decided that as long as I was that close, that I should come on down to Tucson. So the gang, the gang loaded up and came to Mesa and picked me up to take me down to Tucson. Well, it's 100 miles to Tucson, and on the way down just as a break in the driving, we stopped at a little snack place at Picacho Peak, and we were sitting up to the counter having a Coke, and suddenly Mike and Johnny came over and stood on each side of my high stool that I was sitting on, and took me by the arm and eased me down off the stool, and began saying to me, "Now steady, old girl, we'll take care of you, everything is all right." And they staggered me back and forth across the floor, clear out the front door, and over to the car, giving the public that I was having to be taken care of, from having drunk too much. And of all the embarrassing thing was to be staggered by these 2 young men who were my future son-in-laws, and I practically knew it then, and staggered me out through the people who were in this cafe, and clear on out to the car. When they put me in the car, of course I protested a little bit, which just added to the dramatics of the whole thing. I couldn't help but laugh, but as soon as they put me in the car, I locked all the car doors, and they had to stand out a while and induced me to let them in finally before we could go. But I've laughed about this dirty college trick. Imagine them having the nerve to play this trick on their future mother-in-law. I've laughed about this all my life, because, of course, in my protest, I say, "Well, now look, boys, don't push me." And of course, anything that I said or did just added to the drama. After the graduation, Betty Jo applied, and I have to tell you where, but she applied for school teaching, and was granted a contract. Globe. She was going to teach in Globe. It happened that her cousin, Elwood Miller, was superintendent of schools in Globe, and through this contact, she was granted a contract to teach there. And I always knew Betty Jo was going to be a good teacher. She loves working with children. But anyway, that would be September. Well, just before September came along and she had to go, Betty suddenly decided that she wasn't going to teach. She gave up her contract, and Mike came out from Gary in Indiana, where he had gone after graduation and was working for the big steel company there, one of the biggest in the world, and it's where his whole family were occupied and trained. So so Betty Jo canceled her school contract, and Mike came out, and they were married in October. What's the date in October, Mary? Well, anyway, in October they were married. So there wasn't very much chance for wedding preparations, and in this small town, when we thought about dresses and all, why we decided, since Babbitts were wholesale buyers, that we'd go into Los Angeles and select some bridesmaids' dresses over there, because we could buy them wholesale. Betty suddenly became very conservative. She was so adamant about not having a fussy, real elaborate wedding dress that she finally chose a deep ivory satin with a simple, her dress was elegant and very traditional, and this heavy ivory, this beautiful ivory satin that she chose, there some more of the wedding dresses came out the same way, except our summer bride later had a different one, but it was kind of the traditional wedding satin, and it really was very elegant, and it was quaint, and it had a simplicity, but a simple elegance. And then we wanted 5. Wait a minute. Before we went to California, the girls decided that each of them would be a bridesmaid. She would have 4 bridesmaids, and they made a little pledge to each other then that they would, when each one was married, they would come from the ends of the earth to be bridesmaids at the wedding. So we shopped and shopped and shopped for bridesmaids' dresses, and of course it wasn't the bridesmaids to be pleased, it was the bride to be pleased. And after 2 full days of looking and seeking and discussing and trying on, nothing seemed to please Betty. So we went to a wholesale yard goods place and started and bought taffeta. At first we bought autumn, being October, we bought autumn colors ranging from a very soft corn yellow to a yellow orange, just in shaded tones. And we decided on that, but by the time morning came, Betty decided that might be too gay, and we went back then and selected soft shades of old rose, which was very quaint. That it really went beautifully with the bridesmaid, with the bride's gown, and before we left, we also went to a millinery place. We went to a millinery place and had some little rose-colored tulle head dresses, like little hats, and had a bow hanging down the back, and we had some big heart-shaped. Maybe we got these from the florist. Our bridal bouquets were made. Each one carried a little heart-shaped bridal bouquet. I mean, the bridesmaids did, and the dresses, I made every one of them. They with big bouffant skirts and hoop petticoats, and the skirt was tier after tier, each tier in the skirt being a different shade of rose, at least three, wasn't there? Three shades of soft rose down to a deep rose color, and each tier was a little darker, and they had a heart-shaped neckline. And I made all four of those dresses in a month. These bridesmaids' dresses, we decided, would be traditional, that they would wear them at every one of the weddings, and it would just simply mean that they switched brides at each wedding, and the other four girls would wear the traditional dresses. And this we carried out through all the 5 weddings. I think the story of the marriages of my 5 brides is one of the sweetest stories that a mother could ever write, because each one of them, the romances had their own little crisis and their own happy ending, and it was all so interesting, and through it all was this sweet, cooperative, close relationship of the girls. They had grown up, their ages were so close together that they grew up with the same interests, the same grammar school, high school, college, the same music lessons, piano lessons, violin lessons, dancing lessons, participating in all their school activities together. And I'm sure that no family ever had happier childhood than my children. And a part of this is the fact that being as close together as they were in ages, they had all their interests were the same as they grew up. And many times they mentioned this to me, what a happy thing it was for companionship. They had each other, and they were very devoted to each other, and I'm sure this was most meaningful all of their lives. The girls themselves are going to have to fill in these chapters when this story is written, and tell how they passed boys' friends around and even stole each other's boyfriends, because there was competition going along. I do think that the whole episode of the girls going through high school together, they all graduated from Immaculate Heart High School, and then all going to university together. And this should be the 5 Babbitt girls should be a book written all by itself, not having anything to do with family company, just their activities, because it really would be a winner. Even in all their growing up years, I so often dressed them alike, because in those days I did a lot of the sewing. You couldn't go downtown and buy a series of dresses, different sizes for 5 little girls. So I would buy a boat of material. Sometimes I had help with sewing 5 little dresses alike. Sometimes I made them all myself. And this lasted all through their high school years, and even through their university years. There were times when we had 3 dresses alike. I remember the little turquoise taffeta dresses they wore to high school, to the senior prom, and they were really they were long, and they were the first split skirts that they had, with their little ankles showing. It really wasn't as daring as they wear them today, but it was quite daring for the time, and they had little ruffles all the way around the bottom, and they were always conspicuous wherever they went. There was complications that grew out of this thing, because I remember them, Betty Jo telling how hurt and indignant she was at a sorority dance in Tucson. The dresses that they wore that night were little black velvet tops and perfect circle of red plaid skirt. I think it was 9 yards around the bottom, with these 3 Babbitt girls dressed alike. One young man asked Betty Jo to dance, and as they started, he suddenly stopped and pushed her off and looked at her, and he said, "Wrong Babbitt." He thought he was dancing with Imogene, and Imogene was frisky, and Betty was more sedate. He didn't get the Babbitt that he wanted, but because they were dressed alike, he made the mistake, and Betty was so insulted. There's so many things about their school life that these girls have to get together and tell, because it was so interesting, and it was a laugh a day. They must tell you about the agony that especially Imogene, only Imogene went through in joining a sorority, and the huge telephone bill we had, because Imogene would call us up at night and discuss it. It was so very, very difficult for her to choose. After that, she just absorbed her sisters as they came along. Well, we wanted the weddings. The girls thought it was such fun now to plan all of their romances, and the fact that they pledged each other to be bridesmaids at each other's wedding was just one of the things. And in those days, everybody put on a pretty wedding. And so every little detail had to be carried out for Betty Jo. And so, of course, first we had an announcement party. And we conceived of the idea of having a wishing well, putting a mirror with little pebbles on it, putting I had a round mirror, and putting a mirror down the bottom of the well with little pebbles spelling Betty Jo and Michael. So we didn't have a wishing well. We had one of the carpenters down Babbitt's lumber yard build us a wishing well in the backyard, and down went the mirror with the little pebbles on, and the word had not leaked out at all. It was a surprise, and so we had this luncheon, and then the guests were invited to go out in the back yard garden and look in the wishing well. And so this was the way the announcement was made. It was most effective, really. I have to take a deep wait a minute. Yeah, I have to take a deep breath when I start talking about these weddings, because everything for Betty Jo's wedding had to be absolutely perfect. We had to have a bride's book, and we had to have an attendant, and we had wedding cake samples in little boxes tied with ribbons, so that every guest could sleep on it. You know how you sleep on a wedding cake to dream of your future bridegroom. Every single detail had to be carried out. But the old saying goes that in all the world there was never anything perfect in this world except Christ himself. He was the only perfect thing, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So we've gone through life, no matter how much preparation you make, how carefully you plan, be prepared. It won't be perfect. And so these are some of the little anxious imperfections that came along, which was supposed to be the perfect wedding. The bridesmaids, the flowers were ordered from Clara McGonigal, who was the only florist in Flagstaff. And there was only one train coming in from Los Angeles where these flowers were coming from. And when the florist met the train, the flowers were not put off, and we couldn't understand what happened. There were no flowers put off the train at the depot. So frantically we got on the phone to Los Angeles and come to find out all of the wedding flowers, the day of the wedding, had gone on to Winslow. And how to get them back? No such thing as bus service. Those things, I really don't know how the florist got them back. She may have sent a car clear to Winslow, but somehow or other, we did get them back, and she had to get a crew over there, and I helped it frantically to get the bouquets put together and get everything in time for the wedding. But it looked like we were going to have a wedding without flowers. The florist crew were so busy trying to get the wedding flowers organized that we had ribbons along the pews with bows, and there was a small bouquet to go on each one, and the florist was supposed to take a complete charge of all of this, which she, in her anxiety getting the big bouquets ready, she didn't do. And a half hour before the wedding, the bride's mother had to go down to the church and put the bows on the pews. I'm telling you, it was barely done in time for the bride's mother to get into her dress. From Gary, Indiana, Mike drove with his two brothers to come for the wedding. And Mike, like all bridegrooms, was apprehensive about having a big, fancy wedding, and I'm sure he kept pleading with Betty to keep it simple. Men always hate the fuss and flurry of a big wedding, but one of his brothers, Joe, was his best man, I guess. The other brother was Peter, and it was nice that some of his family could be here because, his family being so far away. But Betty Jo was showered with wedding gifts, and when they went on their honeymoon, they took one wedding gift. It was a down comforter that a member of my family had given me. After the wedding, then it was my job as the aftermath to pack up all the wedding gifts and ship them to Gary, Indiana. And the first thing I did, she had so many silver pieces, was to make flannel bags, covers for every single silver thing from the coffee service, even to the flatware. I made cases to put it in before we shipped them back, and this was a huge undertaking for me to make all these covers and pack and ship those wedding gifts. I can remember the endless job that it was. To Gary, Indiana, take it to the shipping department. We were lucky, though, because in those days Babbitt's had a shipping department right in the department store basement, and we could just take a package down there and say, ship this to Gary, Indiana, and the shipping charges were put on our account, and so this was one great blessing. You've no idea what it meant during the years. At a time like this, I appreciated it more than. And we don't have those kind of accommodations nowadays. It's do it yourself. I was married in October, and 10 days before Christmas in December, we had a bombshell dropped in the midst of the family routine. Mary was in Tucson, and she really the bomb shell, or at least the preparation for it, began in November when Mary visited a friend in El Paso. Was it in El Paso, where Ralph Bilby was stationed in officers training there, and Mary accepted a ring from Ralph. When the girls tell their